Hello, Classics fans. Tonight we are going to finish Virgil. We're going to look at Book 12 of the Aeneid. I'm going to get to that in just a second. I have some announcements to make. One of them I'll do right now. The rest I'm going to leave to the end of the lecture so as to hold you in suspense. So you can't just fast forward. But anyway, um, this is going to be the last lecture of this class, which means that your final exam will not cover Ovid or Seneca. I know they were on the syllabus originally, and if things had been normal, we would have got to them. But I can't. I don't want to pile on to you. You have enough to learn for the midterm anyway, or for the final, I should say. So the works the final is going to cover is Aeschylus, Prometheus Bound, Sophocles, Oedipus the King, Aristophanes' Clouds, Euripides' Bacchae, Plato's Republic, and then Virgil. So those lectures are all online, except for I think I did Prometheus Bound with you in person. I can't remember now. Yeah, I think that was the last lecture we had in person. So, but that doesn't give you any kind of excuse because you should have taken good notes today. Okay. So let's go to Aeneid Book 12. When we were in Book 8, we saw Aeneas arrive at the, it's just a town at this stage, but it will be where the city of Rome is built, and he strikes up this alliance with the Arcadian king Evander, who is a good Greek because he represents Stoicism and the simple life. And I talked all about that in the last lecture, so there's no need to recover that right now. Go back and rewatch it if you haven't already, because you might see some of those things on your exam. So in book 12, we see the result of this alliance. So Evander and Aeneas's people have allied together to fight off this other alliance of local tribes, the Rutulians, that's Turnus's tribe, and the Latins. So they're getting ready to fight. But again, Virgil's presented with a kind of a problem here, right? Because Latin, obviously, King Latinus, king of the Latins. Do you think that's going to play some role in future Roman history? I think probably it will. So Latinus is married to Amata. They have a daughter called Lavinia. Lavinia has a childhood sweetheart from a local village called Turnus. There was a prophecy that came to Latinus and Amata when Lavinia was born, that she would marry a foreign-born prince and their descendants would rule over the land forever. And so, like, Turnus wasn't really that big a problem because his mom was Greek. So he kind of sort of technically qualifies as being foreign-born. Ancient prophecy works in funny ways. And so they engaged Lavinia to Turnus. But then Aeneas showed up. And so we get this bizarre love triangle of Lavinia, Turnus, and Aeneas. And so the Latinus breaks off now remember, it's the dad's right as to whom he engages his daughter to or not. Whether he listens to what she has to say is probably situation to situation. So Latinus breaks up the marriage to Turnus and engages Lavinia to Aeneas, which makes Turnus real mad, awful mad, right? Sorry, I keep all my notes right here, so right, which means that he's anger is an emotion, and so he's giving into his desire over his reason, which paints him automatically as a bad stoic, which makes him automatically a bad figure for the future of the Romans, whereas Aeneas, we know all about Aeneas. He's Mr. Goodbar, and so they engage Lavinia to Aeneas, but then Turnus gets mad and declares war. So Latinus panics, breaks off the engagement to Aeneas, gives her back to Turnus. But then when we get to the start of Book 12, we find that Latinus has changed his mind yet again. And he says, let's think about this. First of all, it was my fault, he says, because I broke a pious pledge, and by that he means the engagement of Lavinia to Aeneas. So I was impious. And then he says, of course, it's also his wife's fault because she started crying, and women in Virgil are always, founts of unreasonable desire. I'll save it till later in the lecture. I'll go down the list later in the lecture. And so it's like Latinus is returned to the status of being a pious king because he admits his impiety and wants to atone for it. And he also admits that he acted unreasonably because his wife got in his ear about it. Therefore, Latinus, again, he has his character rehabilitated. And this is important, again, in Virgil, because if you remember way back in Book 2, I talked about how Virgil characterized the Greeks as being cheaters. And they couldn't win fair and square in a fair fight. So they had to cheat to win and lie and put on disguises and set traps and all that stuff. Because if you remember, the Romans are descended from the Trojans. And since the Romans view themselves as an all-conquering force, an all-conquering, at this stage, empire, it doesn't make any real sense to imply that they are descended from a race of people who had been defeated fairly and squarely. So the same side of that coin is this Latinus, Amatia, Lavinia dynamic. Just like you can't have the Romans descended from a defeated people, i.e. the Trojans, so you can't also have the other half of their bloodline descended through an impious people, oath breakers. Right? So Latinus's character has to be rehabilitated. And Virgil does that early on in Book 12, with Latinus admitting that he had done wrong and that he had acted unreasonably, and therefore he made the wrong decision. So this makes war between Aeneas and Aeneas's armies and Turnus's armies inevitable. And it does become inevitable. It's closely modeled. I say closely modeled. It's closely is probably the wrong term. It's recognizably modeled on Book 22 of the Iliad and the fight between Achilles and Hector. There are the same sorts of things that happen over the course of the battle. There's a truce. There's supposed to be a one-on-one fight. That truce gets broken by the wrong side. Eventually ends up with Aeneas and Turnus facing off against one another, and Aeneas killing Turnus. With divine intervention, guess who? Guess who helps Aeneas? I'll give you one guess. Yeah. Did you get it yet? His mom, Venus. By the way, Mom, happy Mother's Day. Yesterday. I called you. Don't complain. So they do this one-on-one fight. And Virgil, there's some interesting narrative things that Virgil does in Book 12. When he introduces Aeneas and Turnus into the battle, he says Turnus is like this wild bull who can't control his rage or his fury. That's a good word for you. Maybe that's one I should give you now. Okay. So let me go over. I'm going to do a little bit of review here, and then I'm going to give you another new term or two. So this is, remember when I talked about Stoicism in connection with Book 6 and the ideals of Stoic life, that you had to act with your reason, and your piety, and then you'd reach the place you're supposed to be, you're destined to be, right? So, and live a simple life. That was on the sheet too. So the idea of reason in Latin, give me a second here. This is not for no reason. I'm going to come back to this later in the lecture. So the English terms are on top, the Latin terms are underneath them. So basically, Stoicism is this eternal combat between reason and desire. The things that you know are the right things to do versus the things that you just want to do. Okay, so ratio, that's where we get rational, our English word rational from, or rationale. Um, Whereas furor, which is where we'll get our English word fury from, is the term that Stoics used to describe desire because they viewed it as an uncontrollable impulse. Furor in this context means more than just anger. It can mean sexual desire or gluttony or anything that falls outside of the bounds of what's reasonable for you to have. So Turnus is described as this figure of fury. Now, see, I put my other sheet down now. I don't know where I put it. That's not it. That's it. So Turnus is described as a bull who is whipping himself up to fury, kicking up dust, getting red in the face. I'll come back to that in just a second. Whereas immediately after Turnus is described, Aeneas is described as, in the translation I assigned you, it's that he's full of joy, content that his reasons for going to battle are correct. And then on his way out to battle, he has time to pull his son Ascanius Iulus aside and do some quality parenting like a good pater should do. Tells his son, learn good luck from other people, but learn hard work from me. Yeah, because you've never had any good luck, Aeneas. But okay, never mind. And that makes him pious. That makes him a good father, right? A dutiful father. So no surprise here. This is it should I mean, you read about half the Aeneid. If at this point you can't see that what Virgil wants us to understand about Aeneas is that he is Mr. Wonderful, and the people he comes up against are sometimes they're good. Like it's hard to say Dido's not a good person, but she's flawed. She breaks her vow of chastity, and then we get to Turnus, and Turnus's only black mark against him, or sin against him, is that he's in love with Lavinia and has been for practically his whole life. And yeah, that's desire, but like, come on now. Love is not always irrational. But in any case, we've already seen how Virgil treats these heightened states of emotion. We saw it in Book 8 when Venus seduced Vulcan to make the shield for Aeneas. Where else have we seen it? Gosh, too many. Book 6 with the... okay, so all right, okay. This will be a good time to mention this. So, I've given you these 4 themes to follow in Homer. I call them lenses, right? And when I use lens, I'm using like a photographic image. Or, I mean, you guys probably don't have analog cameras anymore, but like, you could put a bunch of different filters on your whatever you take on your iPhone. So those are lenses, right? So when you had old analog cameras, the way you manipulated that was by putting lenses of different texture, different color on your lens cap, right? And so when you read Virgil, you have a bunch of different lenses that you can read it through. You can think about it in the context of the Homeric tradition, the epic tradition, right? Remembering Virgil's literary epic, Homer's oral epic, and there are fundamental differences there. Go back and rewatch the lecture on book 1. He also wants to present us with the idea of that Roman history is the culmination of all destiny that the gods had in mind. He's also trying to reinforce this Roman patrician system of patronage, whereby you praise the guy who pays your bills. When you make art, he pays your bills to make your art, but then your art has to reflect positively back on him, and he owns it afterwards. And then there was this fourth theme of the philosophy of Stoicism, that the pater is the most important figure, and the pater manifests itself in, it's not just your dad, as in like your biological dad. It could be your local magistrate. It could be your governor. It could be the top of the government, a policeman. Any male that's in authority is supposed to be treated with the respect that you would treat your own father for. And so that's part of the idea of pietas, doing your duty as a good Roman citizen. And again, I mean, don't forget, this is all filtered through a Roman upper class kind of upbringing. I mean, I'm quite sure it was different on the street. So you act with your pietas, and you act with your reason or your ratio, and you act on those as principles, remembering your pietas both as family and religious aspects. I'll put this up again just for review, since I know this is here somewhere. Yeah, so I put this up a second ago. I'll put it up again. So your sense of duty, your sense of obligation, which is essentially what pietas means. Remember, this doesn't mean exactly the same thing as our English word piety. Okay, we only use piety in the context of religion, but this had a broader sort of, it was a social duty thing, it was a family duty thing, and it also included the religious duty thing. So you had to go make your sacrifices off to Venus and Ares and Jupiter. But you also had your family gods or your hearth gods. Is that clear? No, that looks not clear. Hearth, H-E-R-T-H, your hearth gods, right? And these are your family gods. These are your ancestral gods who have looked out for your family, over the many, because again, these are noble families. So over the many centuries that your family has existed. Okay. So that covers those 4 themes. And like I said, these are like lenses that you can put on your camera, or filters that you can put on your pic. These are the 4 main ones that Virgil, I think, in my reading, in my opinion, can be disputed. There may be others that I have not picked up on yet. But there is one other that does not get talked up enough about in Homer. And that's his fundamental and basic misogyny. When you look at the characters, so means hating. It's the opposite of philo. Like if you're a bibliophile, you love books. Or if you're a philomath, you love to learn. But mis is the opposite of that. So that means hating. And then, or meso in this word. And then the gune is the word for women, as in like gynecology. So misogyny is hatred or mistreatment of women. And for me, Virgil shows very strong signs of this. Later in this lecture, I'm going to get to things that I mean, I'm going to shock you, but there are actually some things that I like about Virgil. But this is one of the most loathsome things. I mean, you run down the female characters of the Aeneid. You start with book 1, and his wife Creusa, who just gets left behind. She's just not important as they leave the city. She's really doesn't matter, you know. And then her ghost appears and says, "Go off, find a new woman." That new woman turns out to be Dido, but Dido breaks her vow of chastity, which means she gets what she deserves because she couldn't act with her pietas over her furor, over her desire. We meet her again in book 6. Who else am I missing? The Sibyl. Sybil has to go crazy before she can deliver. And not only does she have to go crazy, she has to be tamed like a wild animal before she can deliver the prophecies of Apollo. Cleopatra on the shield of Aeneas, she's another suicide like Dido. In a sense, sorry. Sometimes I click on things and I'm not sure what they are. You can think of Dido in the sense as another kind of suicide. Well, no, she actually literally is a suicide, so there's no need to get figurative with this. She falls on her own sword. I talked about Cleopatra. In the battle, as the battle between the Latins / Trojans and the Rutulians goes on, Latinus' wife Amata will end up killing herself too. You will also notice that Lavinia, who is the prize to be won, she's the prize to be won. Like she's basically, she's not made as much of, but in a symbolic sense, she's the Helen of this battle, because whoever possesses Lavinia, it's their offspring that are going to rule this land forever. You'll note the things that Lavinia says in book 12. Go ahead, I dare you, because she doesn't say anything. She gets no lines herself. She's crying, weeping, tearing her cheeks, turning red, blushing. Red is fire. Fire is consuming desire. Like when Venus seduces Vulcan and she introduces the fire into his bones. Like Dido feels this consuming illness, sickness that's like a fire that eats away at the inside of her. So fire generally stands as the sorry, I'm just writing these words because I don't want to have to rewrite them in a minute. Okay, so why would I describe Virgil as being misogynist and not have described Homer as misogynist when Homer portrays women essentially as property? The whole framing context, the first plot motivating thing that happens is a dispute over a couple of girls, one that was taken as property after a successful military raid. The other one, Briseis. I don't know how Achilles got Briseis. I don't know if that's ever specified, but probably under similar circumstances. But in any case, it's not the fact that they're human beings, it's the fact that they're status symbols, right? When Achilles says you got to give Chryseis back, Agamemnon says, well, I can't be king and not have a trophy, so I'm just going to take your trophy. And when he takes Achilles' trophy, it's like that's what pisses Achilles off and why he decides to sit out the war, and then the rest of the plot of the Iliad unfolds from there. So is that misogynistic? Yes, that is misogynistic, but that's misogynistic, I would argue, at a broader kind of cultural level, remembering that the poems of Homer are not written by any one person. They're reflective of cultural practice, right? And I would also add that the female, not all the female characters, but the main female characters in the Iliad all have different and distinct personalities. Helen is not like Andromache. Andromache is not like her mother-in-law, Hecate. They all have different personalities. Hecate is short and harsh. Helen is smooth but also sarcastic, and Andromache is kind of faithful and concerned. So I'm not trying to say that those are the only three personality types or anything like that, but all I'm trying to say is that they do actually have distinguishable personalities. That's not the case in Virgil. It's just simply not the case in Virgil. Women are disposable, women are irrational, women are the cause of strife, women distract men from their regular duties. So that's why I put that fourth theme on the list, because it would be wrong of me to not include it, because I believe it to be true. If you can argue against it, argue against it. Okay, so let's get back and let's wrap up the Aeneid. Again, like I said before, this is supposed to harken back to Book 22 of the Iliad, the fight between Achilles and Aeneas. So there are a lot of not just sort of like so like remember Achilles chased Hector 3 times around the city, right? Well, Aeneas chases Turnus around the city. Except it's not 3 times; it's 10 times. Bigger and butter budget. That's the advantage of doing literary epic versus oral epic. 5 times one way, 5 times back around the other way. There's divine intervention. In this case, it's Turnus' sister, with the permission of Juno, who's allowed to. She's half divine because her dad is the river god, and so so she can change shape and do stuff like that. So she gets involved because Juno tells her to, and she prolongs the battle for a while. Until Jupiter goes to Juno and says, "Look, enough is enough." Right? So let's get back to this theme of misogyny. Transfers to the divine realm as well, right? Jupiter knows what destiny is and what the right thing to do is, whereas Juno is simply this hatred for the Trojans. So Jupiter says to Juno, "Enough is enough. It's time for us. It's time for destiny to happen." And Juno says, "Fine. But you have to promise me that the Trojans will give up the clothes that they wear, how they dress, and they have to give up their language, and they have to which is odd because Aeneas speaks perfect Latin through the whole work. So anyway, suspension of disbelief. Okay, just don't get hung up on that. It's just a literary convenience. So they have to give up their clothes, their language, and the name Trojan. So from now on, they're only allowed to be called the Latins. Okay, that resolves that part of the plot. Now we know Aeneas is going to win, and Aeneas indeed does win. And this is I think, maybe the last thing I'm going to talk about with the Aeneid. But the fact that Aeneas beats Turnus should not be a surprise. It certainly would not have been a surprise to anybody in the Roman audience because they'd already have known the general outline of the myth. And obviously Rome exists. So obviously Aeneas won. There's no surprise. There's very little suspense in Virgil. I think maybe that's why at the end of the day I don't really like him, because there's never really any point in the text where you're like, ooh, how is this going to turn out? Oh my gosh, Aeneas is in a sea storm in the first 150 lines of the book, but then Jupiter shows up and says, he'll be fine, he's going to found an empire that lasts forever. All right. So then Aeneas wanders into the temple of Juno at Carthage, and we're like, oh my gosh, Juno hates you. The temple could collapse on you. You better get out of there. But no, he sees a carving of himself. So he's like, they like me already. No big deal, right? He goes into the underworld, and the Sibyl says, look, you can't go towards the path of punishment. Because you're such a, I don't know, fill in the blank. You're so pure that you can't go off to the place of punishment. Not going to be confronted with these scenes of suffering. We'll get to hear them as an audience, but he won't have to see them. so his pietas will not be violated. Right? Book 8, he shows up at the mouth of the river Tiber, and the god says, "Oh, you must be Aeneas. Here, let me reverse the flow of the river so you don't have to row." like, anyway, so I'm going on and on here. So let me get to the end of. I mean, the notes. That's just the top of my head. I mean, there's a zillion of them, right? Okay. So I want to talk for a minute about what happens at the end of Book 12. And when I talk about the end of Book 12, what I really mean is about the last 20 or so lines of the poem. So take out your text, look at your texts, because I'm going to make reference to specific words that occur in the text. Aeneas and Turnus eventually come to one-on-one, hand-to-hand combat fighting. Turnus recognizing, because Venus comes to Aeneas and says, "Hey, why don't you light the city on fire, and then Turnus will have to fight you, or else the city will burn down." And so mom jumps in and helps, and so Aeneas lights the city on fire. And there's other episodes in Book 12 too where mom helps, the wounding in the foot, and where no one can heal, none of the doctors can get the arrow out, but she comes down, rubs her little magic sauce on it, and it comes out. Right. So anyway, Aeneas lights the city on fire. That's where Queen Amata kills herself because she thinks Turnus is dead, which is an interesting sort of. What's going on there exactly? I don't know. So finally, Turnus is faced to fight Aeneas. They do fight. There's a similar dynamic with divine intervention, and they cast spears and they miss, and then Turnus rushes and Aeneas gets him. And so you can see all the parallels. Now, here's an interesting thing about this at the end of Book 24. This is going to be a brief digression, but it's an interesting thing about the Aeneid. When you look at the prophecy of the Sibyl back in Book 6, remember there were basically two reasons that Aeneas went to the underworld, or went to Cumae to see the Sibyl. He needed to get a prophecy about what was going to happen to him in this new land, and he needed to get to the entrance of the underworld, because he made a promise to his dad, and what do pious sons do? They keep promises to their dad. When the Sibyl gave the prophecy, part of the contents of her prophecy was that Aeneas was going to have to fight a new Trojan war for the sake of a new bride. Okay. But when you look at the dynamics of Book 12, when you think about the Trojan War, you have the Greeks attacking Troy, and more to the point, you have Achilles going after Hector. But when you look at the Aeneid, you have Aeneas, who's the invading army, i.e. the equivalent of the Greeks in the Iliad, killing Turnus, i.e. the equivalent to Hector. So Virgil does a little, this is probably too old for you, a shell game. You know what a shell game is? Yeah. You take coconut shells and you hide pea under them, and then you move them around real quick. And the person on the other side of the table has to lay $5 down and guess which one the pea is under when you're done moving them around as quick as you can. That's a shell game. So Virgil does a bit of a shell game here. In that he's in Book 6 he tells us Aeneas is going to have to fight a new Trojan War, but then in Book 12 Aeneas isn't. He's playing the symbolic role of Achilles. So, it's kind of funny. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm overreading it, but I don't think so. So what I'm building towards here is what Virgil does behind the scenes. Now, I mentioned to you earlier that I don't hate everything about Virgil. Yes, it's fundamentally propaganda for Augustus. But I think Virgil did a few things in the text to kind of tip us off that he wasn't really buying it altogether. And how do we know that? Well, in this, okay, so let me finish book 12 and then I'll come back to give it a second proof to why I argue this. Um, at the In book 12, when Turnus and Aeneas finally square off 1-1, and Aeneas gets the better of Turnus and he has him at his mercy, Turnus says, "Kill me if you think if that's what you want to do. I'm not asking you for mercy," he said, but think of my dad, and you had a dad too, and so even if you decide to kill me, please don't dishonor my body and return it to my dad. This is interesting because what it represents in Turnus is a shift. Going back to Stoicism, it's a shift from fury, that is to say irrationality, that's probably a better word for it, not fury. It's a shift from this irrationality that we saw in Turnus earlier in the book when all he could do was think about his love for Lavinia, which we use the Latin word furor for in the philosophic vocabulary of Stoicism. But he shifts over to this like picture of pietas, right? So what he does is he appeals to Aeneas, respect your father, respect my father in the way that you respect your father. I know that I am your enemy, and so you can kill me, but my pater is not your enemy, and so show him the respect of bringing my body back. And Aeneas kind of like, for a minute, sort of thinks about it for a second, and then he sees so now we're going to go back to book 8 here for a second. Then he sees the sword belt of Pallas. I told you there was foreshadowing here. Turnus has already killed Pallas and stripped him of his armor. And remember, Aeneas pledged to teach Pallas the arts of war and bring him back alive. Go! So when Aeneas sees that, what he said, so he tells, tells Turnus, F off, basically. And then he pulls his sword out and he stabs Turnus through the chest, right? Okay. So here's the thing about the Latin text. It's not that the problem here thematically is not the fact that Aeneas kills Turnus. It's the way Virgil describes him doing it. He says he does it in furoris, in fury, in uncontrolled rage or anger. And in the end. So again, I want to make this point in my argument here is that it's not that Aeneas kills Turnus. Virgil had a million options in the way that he could have characterized Aeneas killing Turnus. He could have said something along the lines of, seeing the sword belt of Pallas, he was reminded of the sacred pledge he made to Evander and said to Turnus, well, I have broken one sacred pledge, so blah, 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 but I will return your body to your dad. Right, and then everything would have been cool, right? Still pious, like he's like pious to the pledge that he made to Evander. He is killing Turnus, but he's also promising Turnus that he'll return his body to his dad. And then everything is Jake, man, and everything is cool, and Aeneas is still Mr. Goody-Goody and all that stuff. But that's not what Virgil says. He says he does it in furoris. Now, I know I've given you this as a vocabulary term, furor, but you have to understand this is an important word in the Roman intellectual vocabulary of Virgil's time period. Okay, this is a time when well, when there were two predominant schools of philosophy at this time, but one of them was Stoicism. So anybody who was even halfway educated, which Virgil's intended audience, I mean, I know it became a bestseller, and obviously because it still survives, and it wouldn't if it wasn't. Um, but he's writing for people who are educated primarily. He's not writing down to his audience. Maybe in some of the sex scenes he is, but generally, like, he's cluing things to his better educated audience here with his use of the vocabulary of the philosophy of Stoicism. Okay, so again, just to recap, the problem at the very end of the book, the interpretative problem. If we wanted to think of Aeneas as Mr. Stoic, Mr. Good Guy, Mr. Reason, Mr. Sound Sleeper, Mr. Honor My Dad and My Religion. But then all of a sudden, the very last thing we see him do in the book is act out of the total opposite of those things. And that's contrasted, of course, by his immediate enemy, Turnus, who's a less important character in the Aeneid. He's basically serving as a foil for Aeneas, more or less, who had been, characterized by his irrationality or his furor. But he switches over to pietas by appealing to the father. Okay, weird. What's Virgil trying to say? Well, remember, this is the last thing you read in the poem. Now, let's go back for a second to the end of Book 6, something I told you I was going to talk about again, and I'm going to do it now. If you remember when Aeneas and his father exited the underworld, there were two gates. And Anchises, the dad, the pater, is leading Aeneas. He's going to lead him through the exit gate. And there are two gates. There's the horn gate and the ivory gate. Horn associated with true things, ivory gate associated with false things, right? And so, again, this is an odd note because Anchises leads Aeneas through the false gate. So we got these two things, these two weird kind of... All the other times in the Aeneid where Aeneas does things that we might go, is that really the right thing to do? Virgil's already given us the excuse to let him off the hook. Like when he leaves Troy, Hector's already told him he can go. When he, shacks up with Dido, his ex-wife has already said it's okay for him to go off and find a new wife, and at that stage we don't know if maybe this is the new wife. Turns out not to be. Not that Aeneas ever pays any repercussions for that. When we, right. There are others. I'm not going to go down the list. I've already gone on the list with you. So. But these two things are a bit more significant. Let me reverse these for the screen. Let me re-reverse it. Because this one happens. No, this one happens at the end of Book 6. Book 6 is exactly the halfway point of the Aeneid. So structurally, it's important. In fact, it's really, you can think of it as the end of Part 1. Because the first 6 books of the Aeneid are sometimes very closely, sometimes more loosely based on the Odyssey of Homer. But the next 6 books, of which we read 8 and 12, are generally structured more on the Iliad. Okay, why am I talking about this? No, I forget. Oh yeah, right. So the book is basically divided into two halves. One part that's 6 books, more or less, and then the second part that's 6 books, more or less. Not to say that there aren't Iliadic things in the first 6 books, or that they're not Odysseic book things in the second 6, but just as a general outline, because the first book 6 have to do with Aeneas and his sea travels and his having to overcome the temptation of female wiles and his trip to the underworld. And those are all things out of the Odyssey. And then the second part of book 6 are about the assembly, the arguments over a woman, the war, the one-on-one combat, and that sort of thing, right? So book 6, or the end of book 6, important because it comes right at the halfway work, and then of course, obviously, the last words of the line that you hear in the poem ought to be in the hands of a good poet, the ones that stick with you. And as hard as I've been on Virgil, he is nothing if not a good poet. His mastery of Latin was arguably second to none. And that was his ambition. So, but there's a further problem here. There's one more thing that I'm going to add here. And I'm going to go back to the end of book 6 and the gates of the underworld, because it's significant. It's not just the point that Aeneas goes through the gate of falsehood. It's that his dad leads him through the gate of falsehood. Because remember, pietas, I've been emphasizing the obligation of the son to the father, but there's also an obligation of the father to the son, which is to lead, to discipline, and direct in the proper ways. So it's fishy, right? Because here's the dad leading his son through the gate of falsehood. So I've said many times already over the course of these last few lectures that every time we hear the name Aeneas, we get the echo Augustus. Aeneas is the prototype for Augustus. Aeneas is the ultimate pater of the Roman people. So, if when we hear Aeneas we hear the echo Augustus, what do we hear when we hear the name Anchises, Aeneas' father? Well, it stands to reason, or at least it's a plausible argument, that what we hear is the echo of the name Julius Caesar. So what does this mean? And I'm going to bring it back to Roman history. My argument, well, it's not original to me, it's been made before me, but it's the argument that I find very appealing and also allows me to at least somewhat slightly redeem Virgil for his otherwise misogynistic goody-goodiness. Propaganda. Augustus is great. Rome is the best ever. It's going to last forever. How'd that work out? This is what we call two-voice criticism. It's two-voice criticism. And what this interpretation of the Aeneid suggests is that there are two voices that you hear. And when I say voices, what I mean is strong themes, meaning that we're supposed to take away from the work outside of just listening to a good story, right? What does it all mean? What does it symbolize? What's the theme behind all of this? So you get these two voices. And the one voice is telling you Augustus is great, Rome is great, all of human destiny has led to Rome, it's sanctioned by the gods, and Rome, we own everything. I mean, yeah, there is definitely, it is safe to say there is definitely a cultural arrogance about the Romans. Not at all like us Americans. That's one. That's the one voice. That's the propagandistic voice, the voice of propaganda. Maybe I should say it that way. And of course, that fits into our larger theme of patronage. Augustus he's gotta please, Virgil has to please Augustus. I mean, it's expected of him. I know we're not doing Ovid, but Ovid was I know I dropped it from the syllabus, but Ovid was a poet who displeased Augustus, and as such was sent into exile for the last 25 years of his life. Yeah, shame I won't get a chance to talk about Ovid, but I'll do them in myth. When you do the myth class, we'll do Ovid then. So the first voice is this large propaganda voice, but then there seems to be this other voice that crops up. Like, so that I've given you the two major points at which this crops up at the end of book 6 with the dad leading the son through the false gate, which doesn't ring with the characterization of Aeneas up to that point in the work. And then at the end of book 12 when he kills Turnus, but he does so not for reasons that can be rationally explained or piously explained, but rather out of his desire that he can't control. So those are the two clanging false notes. But then you begin to question all these things about, Venus bailing out her son all the time, and Aeneas's behavior in Carthage. Anyway, so those are more circumstantial arguments. The two main ones are at the end of book 6 and at the end of book 12. So what is Virgil saying? This might be Virgil kind of making his last sort of stand, saying that we should restore the Republic and get rid of the empire. That the first impious father was Julius Caesar, who wanted to be king, and now we have Augustus, who is emperor, not king. Not king. Don't call him king, because you could be executed if you call him king. Right? And that's kind of like suggested here with Anchises leading Aeneas through the false gate of ivory. Is Virgil saying that the empire is based simply on desire for expansion, desire for wealth, desire for, more territory, more military conquest, more political power, more glory? Is he suggesting here that the root of that happens to do with the fact that Augustus followed, let me start that over again, that Augustus followed in his father's footsteps in the same exact way that Aeneas, so Augustus symbolically follows in his father's footsteps in the same way that Aeneas literally follows in his father's footsteps. Is he saying that? It's an interpretation, which I happen to agree with. Okay, I promised you some special announcements at the end of the lecture, and now I will give them to you. I'm going to repeat some of the things I said earlier at the start of the lecture. I want to make sure that you're clear on this. So the works that are going to be on the examination, I'll get to the date and all that. Hold your britches. Aeschylus, Prometheus Bound. This is all in your syllabus. Sophocles, Oedipus the King, Aristophanes, Clouds, Euripides, Bacchae, Plato, Republic, and Virgil, Aeneid. So those are what I will be examining you on the 20th of May. Wow, 9 days to prepare. It'll be from 1 to 3, and I plan to host it on Blackboard. I haven't finally decided on the format, but don't worry, you won't be writing essays. It'll either be multiple choice or fill in the blank or something, or maybe some real short answers. But you won't have to sit down and write essays. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, which I hope that you will take as good news, is how I'm going to grade you this semester. I am going to grade you based on the best exam score that you submitted. So we will have had 2 exams in this class, the first midterm and then the final. Whichever grade is better is the grade you're going to get. The grades will be pretty steeply curved. If you have not taken either, so if you only took one of the two exams, if you didn't take the midterm, took the final, your grades, your final grade. If you, plus the curve. If you didn't take the midterm, then you'll get your midterm grade, which was also curved. But so if you only take one of them, yeah, you'll get that grade. If you take both of them, then I'll take the higher of the two of the grades. My goal is to, and this is, I mean, I decided on this weeks ago. I didn't tell you about it because I didn't want everybody just guessing what they got on their midterm and stopping paying attention. So that's what I'm telling you now. Yeah. So my goal is to make sure that those who have put honest effort into the class do as well as possible. So, yeah, like I said, I'm going to spend the next few days figuring out, trying to figure out how to do exams on Blackboard. These plans might change, but don't worry, it'll essentially be the same kind of exam if I can't figure out Blackboard. Okay, so I think that covers everything more or less. Again, all of the videos that were, like I said before in an earlier lecture, I managed to screw up my YouTube account and post half the videos to one account and half to another account. I moved them. They're all on the Professor Pletcher account now. So all you have to do is go to YouTube and YouTube search for Professor Pletcher, and they'll all be there. Some of those links on Blackboard are dead. I haven't gotten around to changing them yet because I haven't. And I have a lot to do, and so I sometimes forget. But I will. I guess I should go back and change them. I'm not going to do it now though, because it's 9:30 and I got to microwave myself some dinner. So yeah, I have. Well, I'm sorry we didn't get to spend more time together. And this semester has sucked. And I ought to tell you, I'm going to tell you this now. This is totally off the record because there has been no formal announcement yet. But it is simply my gut feeling that we will not be back on campus at the start of next fall. I just don't see it happening. So I think that your classes will be online next semester. I'm sorry, did I say this to you already? I feel like I did now. Maybe it was another class. I can't remember now. But yeah, so just so you know, and like I said, good luck on your exams. And I'm going to tear up. I can't even see you, but yeah. Bye.